The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched high into the air, its ceiling made of polished crystal that caught the starlight from the orbital rings above. Rows upon rows of alien leaders sat in their seats, their faces twisted into the same expression: pride. Pride that had grown fat from centuries of control. Pride that had never been challenged, never shaken. The chamber was built to make those who entered feel small, to remind everyone who truly ruled the galaxy. But today, as a single Terran ambassador stood alone in the center of that shining floor, something different hung in the air. He didn't look small. He didn't shake. His posture was straight, his eyes cold, and his voice carried no begging, no weakness. It was quiet and heavy, like a blade sliding across stone. Around him, the alien delegates whispered, some sneering openly. They saw a human, not an army. They saw one man where they expected a plea. But Earth had not sent this man to beg. He stood before their empire as a messenger, and his message was not meant to please. His hands rested calmly behind his back as he raised his head and met their eyes one by one, not with fear but with something worse for them: certainty. "You are making a mistake," he said softly. His voice echoed through the perfect acoustics of the chamber, calm and low. "You have declared war. You believe humanity will run. But you've forgotten what we are." A chorus of laughter rose around him. The Speaker of the Council leaned forward, his gold-plated armor glimmering beneath the lights. His long, thin fingers tapped against the desk as he smirked. "Human," he said, dragging the word out like an insult. "Your kind has survived because we allowed it. You were tolerated because you were useful. But now, you've overstepped. You think we will fear you." More laughter rippled through the chamber. The ambassador didn't flinch. He stepped forward once, the echo of his boot sharp against the cold floor. "No," he said. "I don't think you will fear us. Not yet." His eyes swept over the assembly. "You've spent too long believing your council's strength makes you safe. You've built fleets that you think are unbreakable. You've written laws that only apply to everyone but you. You've forgotten that when humans hunt, we don't stop. We never stop." That last line fell like a stone into water, sinking deep into the silence that followed. Some of the alien leaders shifted uneasily, but most laughed even louder, their arrogance a wall they refused to lower. One delegate, a massive reptilian creature draped in ceremonial robes, slammed his clawed hand on the table and hissed, "Humans? Hunt? You are weak. Your colonies are scattered. Your fleets are children's toys compared to ours. You think words will make us afraid?" The ambassador tilted his head slightly. His expression didn't change. "No," he said again, slower this time. "Words don't make anyone afraid. Actions do. And ours have already started." That was when the room shifted, just a little. The laughter didn't stop completely, but it faltered in places, cracks in the sound like fractures in glass. The speaker leaned back in his throne, his smile stiff. "Bold words," he said with false calm. "But we know your fleets. We know your strength. You will break like every lesser species has before you." The human looked directly at him, and for the first time that night, his voice grew colder, quieter, almost like a whisper. "You don't know us at all. You see the Earth you wanted us to be. But what lives in the dark isn't the Earth you control. It's the Earth we built without you looking." The chamber lights dimmed slightly as if the stars themselves had pulled away. It wasn't real, just the weight of his words pressing into their arrogant walls. Behind the polished smiles, some of the counselors felt something they hadn't felt in centuries. Not fear. Not yet. Just a sliver of something unfamiliar. Doubt. The speaker waved his hand dismissively. "Enough," he said sharply. "This session is not for your threats, Terran. You are here as a formality. The Council has already voted. Humanity is declared hostile. Your colonies are to be seized. Your fleets dismantled. Your people absorbed or eliminated." He said it like he was ordering a meal. Like it was nothing. The ambassador didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded once. "Then the hunt begins." The council erupted again in laughter, louder this time, trying to bury the chill that had started to creep into their bones. One delegate leaned toward another and muttered, "Let them bark. They are still nothing." The ambassador turned slowly, scanning every face in the chamber. His eyes didn't hold hate. They held something much worse for the council: memory. A predator remembers the faces of those who mock it. He took a step back toward the exit. No guards stopped him. They didn't fear him. They didn't fear anyone from Earth. Why would they? Humanity was small. Humanity was quiet. Humanity had been quiet for a very long time. But that was their mistake. Far beyond the shining walls of the Council's grand capital, beyond the reach of their scanners and their proud fleets, something moved in the dark. Something built in silence, not for defense, but for the inevitable day when someone would push too far. Hidden stations on forgotten moons flickered to life. Relay networks that had been cold for decades began to hum. In the black void, a fleet of ships with no signatures, no banners, and no mercy adjusted their course. Their engines made no sound. Their signals were masked beneath the background noise of the galaxy itself. These were not ships built for display or diplomacy. These were weapons designed to disappear and kill. The ambassador left the chamber in silence, the tall golden doors closing behind him with a heavy, final sound. Inside, the council resumed its mocking chatter, already making plans to divide human territory among themselves. They joked about how easy it would be. How quick. How clean. The speaker leaned back on his throne and said, "By the next cycle, humanity will be nothing more than a footnote." In the corridors outside, the human ambassador walked calmly toward the shuttle bay. His earpiece clicked softly. A voice whispered through it, calm and cold. They laughed. He didn't smile. "Good," he replied. "It's easier when they laugh." Above the council capital, high in orbit where their fleets were gathering to prepare their punishment for humanity, the stars looked normal. Nothing gave away the truth that hunters were already moving. In systems far from their control, entire human outposts flickered into a coordinated silence. No distress calls. No panic. Just disappearance. To the council, it would look like retreat. But to humanity, it was positioning. Back in the chamber, as the council began formalizing their war declaration, a single pulse signal reached a black station hidden behind a dying star. Deep inside that station, an old war map came alive. Thousands of Terran ships stirred in perfect silence. They had waited a long time for this moment, not because they feared the council, but because they needed the council to believe in their own superiority. And now they did. On the council's central news network, the declaration of war broadcast across the galaxy. It was supposed to be a moment of triumph. The galaxy laughed with them. But in quiet corners, in places where light didn't reach, others felt the shift. Some whispered, "They've awakened the hunters." The speaker gave his final speech that night, declaring the end of humanity's presence in the stars. But while his words echoed proudly through the Empire, the darkness beyond their control whispered something else. It whispered of engines awakening, of silent fleets moving, of predators stalking prey that thought itself untouchable. As the Terran ambassador's shuttle left orbit, he stared at the council world shrinking behind him. It glittered like a jewel, proud and blind. His voice came low into the comms. "They think we're weak." A second voice answered, steady and cold. "They won't think for long." In the void, black ships moved like shadows underwater, shifting into position. The council believed they were beginning a war they would easily win. Humanity knew the truth. They weren't beginning anything. They were stepping into a hunt that had already been prepared for years. The predator doesn't roar before it strikes. It waits. And the waiting was almost over. The warning had been given. The council laughed. And far away, in the quiet dark, the hunt began. The first disappearances came quietly, so quietly that most of the council didn't even notice, or maybe they didn't want to notice, because when you mock a warning, the last thing you want to admit is that it might have been real. At the outer edge of Terran space, far from the glittering core worlds, an entire patrol squadron sent by the council entered a seemingly empty star system. Their orders were simple: find any remaining Terran resistance, crush it fast, and return home as heroes. They expected broken colonies and panicked civilians. They expected easy prey. What they found instead was silence. The kind of silence that clings to the skin and makes even trained soldiers shift in their seats. The fleet's flagship cruised through the darkness, its lights cutting across asteroid fields like knives, but no signals came back. No heat trails. No radio chatter. Not even the faint heartbeat of a ship's reactor. Just the quiet hum of their own engines echoing through the void. The fleet commander stood at the front of the bridge, tapping one clawed hand against the railing with growing irritation. They ran, he muttered, and his officers nodded quickly, eager to agree. Cowards, someone said. Humans always run. That was what they believed. That was what the Council had taught them to believe. So they moved forward, careless and overconfident, spreading their ships through the system like a net, expecting their prey to panic and scatter. But nothing happened. No response. No trap sprung. Just the silence getting heavier, like the air itself had weight. An hour later, the first patrol wing vanished. No distress call, no explosion on sensors, no debris. One moment their transponder lights were glowing on the command display. The next moment, they were gone. The commander barked for a full scan, demanding answers. The scanners returned clean, too clean. No energy spikes. No engine trails. No battle. Just absence. A technician tried to suggest equipment failure. The commander snarled. An entire wing doesn't vanish because of a broken sensor. Minutes later, a second wing disappeared. This time, the last transmission wasn't silence. It was breathing. Heavy, strained breathing through the comm channel. A single voice whispered, "They're here," and then it cut out. Every officer on the bridge froze. The commander felt a cold shiver crawl down his spine. He didn't like this. Nothing should be able to move that fast. Nothing should be able to get this close without detection. He ordered all ships to tighten formation and prepare weapons. They moved into a defensive ring, but the darkness pressed in closer, indifferent to their fear. Back on the Council capital, when the First Fleet's report failed to come in, no one cared. The Council laughed it off in their grand chamber. A minor delay, the speaker said. They're probably too busy fighting off what little is left of the humans. Another delegate added with a grin, by the time the sun rises, they'll be waving Terran flags as trophies. Their arrogance was too thick to let doubt in. But doubt had already entered the hearts of the soldiers out there in the black. On the command deck of the flagship, the commander ordered a full retreat to regroup, but before the order could even reach the fleet, the lights on the display began to vanish one after another like stars being swallowed by a hungry sky. One scout frigate. Then two. Then four. Then the destroyers. Ships vanished without sound, without warning, leaving behind only gaps on a monitor that now looked like a battlefield after a storm. Panic spread through the bridge like fire. Officers shouted over each other. "I can't get them on comms." No signals. "They are gone." The commander clenched his jaw and shouted for all ships to fire blind into the dark. Rail shells and plasma bolts streaked out into the void, lighting the empty space like fireworks. But nothing was there. Nothing but the cold stars. Then, just as the firing stopped, the darkness answered back. Not with a roar, not with overwhelming force, but with precision. One clean shot. A rail slug, invisible until it struck, punched through the hull of their carrier like it was paper. The entire ship folded in on itself, a flash of fire, then nothing. No explosion big enough to track. No lingering debris. Just gone. Another ship followed. Then another. This time, the screams echoed through the comms. "We can't see them. They're hitting us from every angle. There's nothing on the scanners." The commander slammed his hand on the console, shouting for them to form a wall, but it was useless. You can't build a wall against something that's already inside. In the distant dark, hidden behind dead moons and shadowed gas giants, the Terran fleets moved like wolves in a forest, silent and coordinated. Their black hulls absorbed every sensor ping, their movements timed to the beat of a plan years in the making. They didn't charge. They didn't reveal themselves. They circled. They waited. Every shot they fired struck a critical node, cutting out communication lines, crippling ships before they could react. Back on the bridge, the commander finally saw it. Not a fleet in the open, but a flicker. A shadow against a star. Too fast. Too smooth. He whispered, "Hunters," before the rail slug punched through his ship and took his words into the void. The entire First Fleet died in silence. No distress beacons. No retreat. Just the cold stars swallowing their arrogance whole. When the Council finally noticed their minor delay had stretched too long, they sent another fleet. Then another. Each vanished the same way. No battles reported, no victories broadcast. Just empty systems where their fleets used to be. But still the speaker mocked the warnings, his grin sharp and false. "They think they can scare us," he said. "They're only delaying the inevitable." He didn't understand that the inevitable had already arrived. Across the outer sectors, whispers began to spread. Merchant ships passing near Terran space reported strange sensor readings, shadows moving where no fleet should be. Whole convoys changed their routes out of fear. Small colonies on the border went dark without explanation. The galaxy was starting to feel it. The cold shift in the air that always comes before the predator strikes. The Council laughed in their chamber, wrapped in their arrogance. But the admirals at the front were beginning to feel the truth. The humans weren't fighting. They weren't defending. They were hunting. And the hunt had just begun. The Council's grand war chamber was filled with light, sound, and false confidence. But beneath that glittering surface something dark was growing. A crack spreading through the pride they had worn for centuries. It began when the Third Fleet vanished. No distress signals. No survivors. No trace. Just another empty sector where their banners once flew. The speaker stood before the glowing star map, his fingers tightening on the edge of the table as red icons blinked out one after another. Around him, delegates and admirals murmured nervously, still trying to bury their fear behind jokes and arrogance. "Probably a malfunction," one said. "Maybe they retreated too far into the dark," another offered. But everyone could feel it, the weight pressing in from somewhere unseen. It wasn't a retreat. It was something moving toward them, patient and precise. One of the admirals finally spoke up, his voice low and shaking. "Sir, this is not a normal war." The speaker's eyes snapped toward him, sharp and cold. "What are you saying?" The admiral swallowed hard. "They don't fight us. They erase us. One moment the fleet is there, the next it's gone. No wreckage. No prisoners. Just silence." The chamber fell quiet for the first time in days. No one wanted to admit it, but the pattern was too clear to ignore. Humanity hadn't sent an army to fight head-on. Humanity was circling them like predators around a wounded beast. Reports began to flood in faster. Outer colonies whispered about black shapes in the void. Merchant ships changed their routes to avoid Terran space. Minor patrols disappeared in hours. The Council's admirals pored over sensor data and found nothing. No energy signatures, no detectable fleets, just holes where their forces used to be. "How are they doing this?" one admiral hissed. Another answered with what everyone feared. "They've been planning this for years." Across the border sectors, entire Council armadas tightened formation, expecting an attack, but the humans didn't strike openly. They let the fear do their work for them. Fleet commanders barked at their crews to stay sharp, but even the most disciplined soldiers jumped at shadows on the scanners. One fleet, positioned near the Syrian nebula, reported faint movement. The admiral there laughed, thinking it was debris. Then two ships went dark. The others screamed over comms, "Where are they? I can't see anything. They're inside the perimeter." The last transmission from that fleet ended in a whisper, "They're hunting us." Back in the Council chamber, the speaker tried to hold the illusion of control. "Send more fleets," he ordered coldly. "Crush their hiding places. We will not be made fools of." But deep down he could feel the doubt tightening around his throat. Every new fleet he sent out vanished faster than the last. Humanity wasn't playing defense. Humanity was pulling the strings of a war the Council didn't even understand. The intelligence division tried to analyze the disappearances. They tracked the last known coordinates of multiple fleets. The pattern terrified them. The Terrans weren't attacking randomly. They were leading the fleets deeper and deeper into empty space, away from supply lines, away from reinforcements. Every jump brought them closer to some invisible net. One analyst whispered, "This isn't chaos. This is a hunt." Another whispered, "We're the prey." In the outer dark, far beyond the Council's sensors, Terran ships moved in absolute silence. No transmissions. No visible engines. Their black hulls merged with the void like they were born from it. Terran captains watched the Council fleets march exactly where they wanted them. Every move was calculated, every signal designed to mislead. The hunters didn't need to rush. They simply waited as the prey walked deeper into their jaws. Fleet after fleet began reporting the same nightmare. No battles. No grand engagements. Just flickering sensors, ships vanishing one by one, and whispers on comms before everything went dark. "We're surrounded. I can't see them. It's too late." These weren't soldiers fighting. These were soldiers realizing the trap had already closed. Admiral Rither, one of the oldest commanders of the Council Navy, stood alone on the bridge of his flagship as he listened to those final transmissions from his fleets. He had commanded wars for decades. He had crushed rebellions and burned worlds. But he had never heard silence like this. "Where are they?" he whispered to himself, but there was no answer. Outside, the stars looked the same, calm and innocent. But he could feel it, something watching them from that darkness. At the same time, Council intelligence picked up their first strange signals. Not enemy transmissions, not fleet chatter. Just faint echoes bouncing between dead systems. Someone was coordinating on a network they couldn't touch. The analysts tried to trace it, but it vanished like smoke. One technician said softly, "They're everywhere." Another corrected him. "No, they're where we least expect them." Fear began to spread like cracks through a frozen lake. Admirals who once barked orders with arrogance now lowered their voices. Soldiers who once cheered about victory now whispered in dark hallways. Even the delegates in the Council chamber stopped laughing when they walked past the war map. Every red dot that vanished was another fleet lost to something they could not see, something they could not stop. Still, the speaker refused to bend. His voice was harder now, more desperate than proud. "They want to frighten us," he said. "They want us to turn on each other. But we will crush them." He slammed his hand down on the table. But no one cheered. No one believed him anymore. Even the strongest empires can feel the weight of the hunter's breath on the back of their neck. Outside, in the black, Terran ships continued their quiet work. They didn't rush. They didn't panic. They moved with the cold patience of predators who knew the prey had nowhere to run. And as another fleet blinked out from the map, the galaxy finally began to realize what the Council had refused to believe. Humanity didn't make empty threats. When humans hunt, they never stop. The Council fleets pushed deeper into the darkness, driven by arrogance, fear, and denial all tangled together, like prey walking straight toward the predator's jaws because it refuses to believe the danger is real. The admirals gathered in their command ships, boasting loudly over secure channels that they would wipe humanity from the stars, that these disappearances were nothing more than scattered human raiders, that their mighty fleets could never be touched. But out in the silent dark between stars, where no broadcasts could reach, reality moved quietly and without mercy. Humanity had built the battlefield long before the Council even realized a war had begun. Every jump the fleets made, every route they took, every confident advance was exactly where the hunters wanted them to go. The first sign that something was wrong came at the Darios cluster. The Fifth Armada arrived expecting to find a Terran stronghold, a big target they could finally destroy to prove their strength. Instead, they found a dead system, a single cold sun, a few shattered moons. No colonies, no ships, just quiet. The admirals laughed at the scans and ordered the fleet to spread out and search. "Cowards," one of them spat. They ran again. But while they scattered, something flickered at the edge of the scanners. Not a fleet, not a signal, Just a single pulse, so small it almost didn't register. It was gone a heartbeat later, but it was enough. It told the Terrans exactly where the Armada was. The Council's fleet didn't know they had walked into the first net. Black Terran ships, invisible to ordinary scanners, had been waiting in the shadows behind asteroid belts and fractured moons. They had been there for days, patient and silent, watching the enemy move into the perfect position. While the Council's admirals argued and laughed over their own superiority, the hunters began to close the circle. Terran ships moved with coordinated precision, like wolves tightening around a herd that didn't know it was already surrounded. The admiral of the Fifth Armada sat back in his throne-like chair on the flagship bridge, smug and certain of his power. "They think hiding will save them," he said with a sneer. But at that exact moment, the lights on the tactical display blinked once. Then twice. Then ships began to vanish, not because they were destroyed, but because their communications had been severed. A sudden, sharp silence rolled across the fleet as the admirals barked orders. "Bring up the scanners. Reform the line. Find them." But the dark gave no answers. It only pressed closer. On the edge of the system, the first Terran strike began. A single rail slug, perfectly calculated, hit the outermost cruiser dead center, splitting it in half before its shields even flared. The crew didn't have time to scream. A second ship followed. Then a third. The Council fleet opened fire wildly, blasting empty space, their plasma bolts lighting up the dark like fireworks for an enemy they couldn't even see. In the chaos, Terran jammers activated, shrouding the fleet in static and false signals. To the Council, it felt like the void itself was swallowing them alive. A young officer on the bridge whispered, "They're everywhere," but no one answered. Because they all felt it too, the cold presence surrounding them, the invisible noose tightening with every second. Fleet formations began to break as fear wormed its way into every ship. Captains barked conflicting orders. Cruisers rammed into one another in their panic. Some tried to flee, but the jump coordinates had already been scrambled. They couldn't run. The trap was complete. In the darkness beyond the system, Terran dreadnoughts emerged like living shadows, their black hulls reflecting nothing, their engines leaving no trail. Their guns lit up silently, precise and unhurried. The Council ships died one by one, not in a grand battle, but in a slow, methodical slaughter. It wasn't war. It was the soundless tearing of arrogance. Meanwhile, on the Council capital, the Speaker and the High Command watched the fleet's signal feed collapse in real time. One by one, the icons turned red, then disappeared altogether. Admirals in the war room argued, shouting over each other, demanding reinforcements, insisting that the Terrans must have used some hidden superweapon. "This isn't possible," one roared. "No one can strike us like this." But it was happening, and deep down, they knew it was no miracle weapon. It was strategy. It was preparation. It was a hunt they had walked into blind. The Fifth Armada, the pride of the Western sector, was gone in less than an hour. Out of thousands of ships, only a handful limped back toward Council space, their hulls cracked, their crews whispering about the shadows. The survivors spoke in broken voices, describing fleets they couldn't see, weapons that struck without warning, and silence, always silence. "They didn't fight us," one captain whispered to the debriefing officer. "They stalked us." Still, the Speaker refused to let fear show in front of his counselors. His jaw clenched as he stared at the blank star map. "Then we crush them harder," he said through his teeth. "We'll gather the core fleets. We'll burn them out of the dark." But behind his words was the growing truth that everyone else could see in his eyes. The enemy wasn't being drawn out. The Council was being pulled in. Far away, hidden in the black where the Council dared not look, Terran fleet commanders watched the aftermath with cold precision. They didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They simply moved on to the next position, already preparing the next trap. This wasn't a war of pride. It was a hunt that had been planned long before the first Council ship crossed the border. The fleets kept advancing into the void, telling themselves they were still in control, but the hunters were no longer waiting. The circle was closing, and the Council hadn't even realized it was already standing in the center. The Fifth Armada's destruction shook the Council like a blade pressed against its throat, but still they refused to accept the truth. They told themselves it was bad luck, an unlucky encounter, a single ambush. But deep down, behind their loud voices and empty threats, a cold fear was taking root. The star map on the wall of the war chamber told a story that no speech could cover, entire fleets blinking out like dying candles. Every sector they entered ended the same way: silence, static, disappearance. But the speaker still stood at the head of the room, his hands gripping the edge of the table like a man trying to hold on to a crumbling wall. "We are the Council," he growled. "No one hunts us." But out in the dark, someone already was. 2 weeks after the Fifth Armada vanished, the largest deployment in Council history launched from the core. They called it Operation Final Dawn, a name meant to inspire fear in their enemies. It was a massive force of nearly 60,000 ships, battleships, cruisers, carriers, dreadnoughts, everything they could gather. It was the kind of armada that had crushed empires before. It moved like a storm, arrogant and loud, with banners streaming and weapons charged. The galaxy watched the departure with awe. Even the Council's enemies whispered that no one could stand against such power. But humanity wasn't standing against them. Humanity was waiting for them. The Armada pushed past the border of Terran space like a blade plunging into the dark. They expected to meet fleets head-on, to burn Terran colonies, to force them to kneel in one final, glorious show of dominance. But instead of war cries and resistance, they found the same thing the other fleets had found before them: silence. The first systems they entered were empty, stripped clean of any useful material, as if humanity had already harvested everything long ago. Abandoned stations drifted through space like hollow bones. Supply caches were gone. Planets that once had cities were nothing but silent spheres wrapped in shadows. It wasn't a battlefield. It was bait. As the Council fleet spread wider and deeper, some admirals began to whisper what they had previously laughed at. "They knew we were coming. This is planned. We're walking into something." But the speaker's voice rang through the command channels like iron. "Push forward. They can't run forever." So the Armada pressed on, still believing numbers would save them, still believing their size made them untouchable. But every mile they moved, their sensor readings grew worse. Static interfered with long-range scans. Ships vanished from short-range comms. Jamming signals flickered like ghosts at the edge of their perception. They told themselves it was just Terran sabotage. But they didn't see the hunters circling them like wolves in the forest. It began at the Helix Expanse. The fleet had just jumped through the last stable corridor when the jammers hit them full force. Every communication line snapped to static. Fleets that had flown together for decades suddenly found themselves blind and alone. Admirals screamed across dead channels. Engineers pounded consoles, trying to reboot systems. But the Terrans had already buried themselves in the dark. Their black ships were positioned like needles in the shadows, invisible to sensors, waiting for the exact moment to strike. The first attack came with the precision of a blade. A single rail slug tore through a command carrier's bridge, slicing it open before anyone could react. There was no warning, no sign of incoming fire. 1 second the flagship was whole, the next it was gone. Panic erupted across the Armada. Ships opened fire blindly into the void, their own energy bolts colliding with their allies, turning formation into chaos. In the confusion, the Terran fleets closed in. Their ships moved without broadcasting, without light, without fear. They didn't attack everything at once. They picked targets carefully, cutting out communications hubs, command ships, shield carriers. Every kill weakened the Council's ability to see, to speak, to fight. On the flagship of the Eastern Wing, Admiral Karath stood frozen as he watched his tactical display turn into a graveyard. Whole squadrons vanished in seconds, leaving only static behind. "Where are they?" he shouted. His officers scrambled, scanning desperately. "We can't see them," one cried. "They're everywhere," whispered another. In that moment, the Admiral understood something terrible. This wasn't a battle. This was an execution. The Terran strike waves hit next. A coordinated volley of black rail slugs and kinetic lances tore through the armada from all directions. Giant dreadnoughts, built to endure entire wars, cracked like eggshells. Cruisers turned into drifting wrecks before they even fired a second shot. Escape pods were vaporized. Engines died. The once mighty fleet, so loud, so proud, was reduced to chaos in a storm of silent, precise destruction. And all the while, the humans never sent a single message. Not one word. Their silence was louder than any declaration of war. In the council capital, the speaker and high command stared at the feed in horror as entire formations went dark within minutes. The room that once roared with overconfidence was now silent, filled only with the sound of shallow breathing and the crackle of failing transmissions. One of the admirals in the chamber whispered, "They're not fighting for defense. They're hunting us. Piece by piece." No one disagreed. Back in the expanse, a few council ships tried to flee, but the jump gates had been sabotaged before the battle began. The Terrans had sealed the exits without anyone noticing. Those who ran fell into ambushes. Those who stayed were surrounded. The galaxy's largest armada died in the dark, not with an epic clash, but with a slow, merciless crushing. By the time the firing stopped, only a few hundred ships remained from the 60,000 that had entered. Survivors would later whisper of shapes they never saw, of rail shots that came from nowhere, of voices whispering through comms right before silence. Some swore they saw black ships gliding past their wrecks, watching but not finishing them off. As if the hunters wanted survivors to crawl home and spread the fear themselves. And that's exactly what happened. The survivors limped back to council space with cracked hulls and hollow eyes, their voices hoarse from screaming. "They don't fight like us," one captain said. "They don't fight at all. They hunt. And they never stop." That night, for the first time in living memory, the council chamber wasn't filled with laughter. It was filled with silence. Not the proud silence they loved. A different one. The kind that grows when a predator is already too close. And far beyond their borders, deep in the black, the Terran fleet prepared for the next strike. They had not fought a war. They had only taken their first step in the hunt. The news of Operation Final Dawn's destruction spread like a virus across the galaxy, tearing through the illusion of power the Council had wrapped around itself for centuries. The speaker tried to hold control, standing before trembling delegates with his usual proud smile. But the smile didn't reach his eyes anymore. Behind him, the war map flickered red. Entire sectors that were once filled with council fleets now lay hollow and empty, marked with black zones where signals were lost and no ship returned. For the first time, the galaxy whispered not about the council's might, but about their fear. Whispers spread like smoke. Humanity wasn't fighting. Humanity was hunting. On the outer borders, panic was already seeping into the cracks. Civilian convoys rerouted away from Terran space. Merchants refused to travel the lanes they once controlled. Outer colonies fortified themselves, but no one believed their defenses would hold if the hunters came. The speaker pounded his hand against the table in rage, but rage didn't stop the silence growing around them. "We will gather the core armada," he declared. "We will strike at their heart." His voice echoed across the chamber, but the admirals no longer looked at him with confidence. They had seen what had happened to fleets stronger than this one. In secret, the Council's intelligence division met in the lower levels of the capital, away from the public speeches. They projected the data, the vanishing ships, the lost timelines, the patterns that everyone else was pretending not to see. One analyst, her voice trembling, pointed to the map. "They are not attacking randomly. Every fleet we send is being herded deeper and deeper into zones they already control. It's a hunting ground. We're not the hunters anymore. We're the prey." Another officer whispered, "They've been preparing this for years." The silence in the room was heavier than the war above it. Meanwhile, the few survivors of Final Dawn limped through the void toward the core. Their ships were broken, their crews hollow, their voices flat as they sent their reports. "We never saw them," one captain rasped. "They were there before we arrived. They let us walk into their teeth." Another survivor, a young officer with blood still smeared on his uniform, said only one thing before collapsing: "They don't fight like us. They don't need to." In the border systems, Terran activity increased. Black ships appeared at the edges of sensor range, always at the edge, always watching, never striking unless someone moved toward them. Entire planetary defense fleets froze in their docks, terrified of vanishing like the others. Terran ships moved like ghosts through the dark, using jump corridors no one knew existed, bypassing the Council's detection grids entirely. Every time the Council tried to deploy a force, it disappeared faster than the one before. Fear wasn't just spreading. It was infecting everything. On the Council capital, the Speaker stood on the balcony of his private chamber, staring up at the night sky. The stars that once felt like they belonged to them now seemed distant, cold, and filled with something watching back. He clenched his fists. "They're just humans," he whispered. But even he didn't sound convinced anymore. His own guards didn't meet his eyes. The Council's enemies had never made him feel fear. Humanity had. Not because they shouted, but because they didn't. In the core fleet staging yards, thousands of warships gathered for what the Council declared would be their final stand. This was the last true fleet they could muster, the last symbol of their power. Propaganda screamed across the galaxy, trying to drown out the fear with promises of victory. But in the barracks, in the hangars, in the dark corners where soldiers whispered to each other, no one believed it. Veterans who had seen the Terran hunters never returned the same. They spoke of black shapes moving without light, of rail slugs hitting without warning, of silence swallowing entire crews before a single alarm sounded. Some soldiers didn't even make it to deployment. They deserted before the fleet launched. On the night before the core armada moved, the Terrans made their presence known, not with a speech, not with an attack. A single Terran probe drifted through the perimeter, a shard of black metal with a glowing red symbol on it. It carried no weapons. It didn't respond to hails. When the technicians cracked its encryption, the probe played a single audio line, "Run." Then it disintegrated into ash. The admirals called it a trick, but every soldier who heard it felt their stomach twist. The core armada launched anyway, engines blazing like a fire meant to burn away fear. 60,000 more ships surged toward the dark. They were louder than any fleet before them. Their engines screamed. Their formations were perfect. But they were heading into a battlefield already prepared for them. Terran traps weren't made of walls. They were made of silence, shadows, and precision. The first sign came 4 hours into the jump corridor. The long-range comm relays began to distort. Tiny static patterns crept into the signals. Then the jump corridor lights dimmed for just a moment. One captain laughed nervously. "Just a glitch." Another told him to stop shaking. But that dimming wasn't a glitch. It was the first bite of the hunter. In the Terran command center hidden in the void, human officers sat in near darkness, their faces illuminated only by the faint glow of tactical displays. They watched the core armada advance exactly where they wanted it. One commander spoke softly, almost like a whisper. "Do we strike now?" The fleet admiral shook his head. "No. Let them come closer. Let them see nothing. Let them feel it." The room was quiet. No shouting. No cheering. Just the patient heartbeat of a predator waiting for its prey to stop pretending it's in control. As the core armada pushed deeper, sensor readings began to twist again. Some ships reported seeing flickers of movement in the dark. Others swore they saw black shapes drifting just outside their targeting range. One captain, an old veteran, clenched his hands on the railing and whispered, "They're here." The admirals dismissed him. "Paranoia," they said. But then one ship went silent. Then another. Then another. By the time the Council realized what was happening, the entire rear formation had been cut away like meat from bone. The Terrans were already inside their formation, moving between their ships without being seen. Their jammers flooded the channels. Their rail guns whispered through the void. The Council's mighty core armada, the last symbol of their strength, had walked into the same hunt every other fleet had died in. On the Council capital, the Speaker stared at the tactical feed as red icons vanished faster than he could speak. No enemy signatures. No targets. Just the sound of nothing. "Where are they?" he whispered to no one. But everyone knew the answer. Humanity was everywhere. And they never stopped the hunt. The core armada was supposed to be the symbol of the Council's strength, the proof to the galaxy that humanity's shadow war would end like all other rebellions had before, with fire, noise, and the Council's banner planted over the ashes. But as the hours bled into darkness and the fleets drifted deeper into the void, far colder replaced that confidence. It started slowly, with flickering signals, broken jump lanes, faint shadows moving across scanners. At first, the admirals called it interference. Then they called it sabotage. But when their ships began to vanish one by one, when the backlines stopped responding, when their own formations became silent graves, they finally began to understand the truth. They weren't marching to victory. They were marching to their end. The Terran fleets didn't arrive like a storm. They didn't roar into battle. They were already there. They had been there from the beginning, hidden in the dark like wolves circling prey that hadn't even noticed the teeth around its throat. The core armada moved forward, its formation stretched and brittle. Its commanders still barking orders they couldn't even hear each other answer anymore because the Terran jammers had already turned their grand war machine into scattered fragments of panic. A destroyer on the outer edge sent a broken transmission before going dark. "We're not alone." A minute later, its beacon vanished. Then 5 more. Then a carrier. Then 2 cruisers. No alarms, no distress calls. Just the kind of silence that made every captain grip the railing tighter. The admirals tried to rally their forces, to tighten their lines, but tightening meant nothing when the enemy was inside their formation already. Terran ships glided through the dark like blades through water, invisible and silent, firing only when needed, cutting away command ships and comm relays in perfect, measured strikes. Every hit was planned. Every disappearance was deliberate. The Council's Grand Armada wasn't being fought. It was being carved apart piece by piece. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Korth slammed his fist against the console, screaming for visual contact. His officers tried desperately to scan the void, but the readings twisted and blurred, Terran stealth signatures ghosting through every frequency. "There's nothing out there," one officer cried. "That's a lie," Korth hissed. "They're out there. They've always been out there." He stared into the starless dark, and for the first time in his long military career, he felt something he'd only ever heard about in myths. He felt hunted. The first coordinated strike began at 0300 shipboard time. The fleet was spread across 6 sectors, their communication in tatters, their formations broken. Then, without warning, every Terran dreadnought uncloaked at once. Thousands of black warships emerged from the dark like living shadows, their engines cold, their hulls invisible until the last moment. They didn't speak. They didn't broadcast. They just fired. Rail slugs and kinetic spears screamed through the void at unimaginable speeds, cutting through shields, hulls, and command centers in seconds. The Council ships, built for loud, showy wars, weren't ready for this. Carriers burned. Cruisers shattered. Battleships imploded from single precision strikes. It was not a fight. It was slaughter. On the bridge of the second flagship, panic gripped the officers as their screens filled with red. "They've surrounded us," one whispered. "No," another corrected him, his voice breaking, "they were always around us." Terran ships moved between their wreckage like predators among broken prey. Council gunships fired wildly, hitting each other more than the enemy. Every scream on the comm was swallowed by static before it could finish. The galaxy's greatest fleet was dying, not in hours, but in minutes. Back on the Council capital, the Speaker and the entire High Command watched the feed collapse in real time. One by one, fleet markers went black. No survivors. No escape. Entire sectors of their last hope blinking out as if they had never existed. The Speaker's hands trembled on the table as his voice cracked for the first time. "Why can't we stop them?" No one answered. The silence in that chamber was heavier than any speech. In the dark above the battlefield, Terran Command watched it all unfold with surgical calm. Inside the massive black flagship, the human admiral stood at the center of a circular room, his hands folded behind his back, eyes locked on the holographic display of the dying armada. One of his officers leaned in. "They are breaking." The admiral's voice was quiet, measured, without pride or mercy. They broke the day they laughed. The Council fleet tried to run. They thought if they could punch through one sector, maybe they could save what remained. But the Terran ships closed in like jaws. Escape routes were already sealed. Jump lanes were dead. A single carrier tried to break away. 3 Terran frigates flanked it like shadows. 1 clean volley. Gone. Another battleship turned its guns on the dark, firing blindly. 3 Terran dreadnoughts returned a silent barrage that erased it from existence. The galaxy's most powerful armada was being hunted like animals in the cold night. Panic spread faster than any command. Captains abandoned formations. Crews overloaded their engines in desperate jumps that never reached their destinations. More ships exploded trying to flee than were shot down. There was no hope left. They weren't fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting to die slower. Hours later, when the last of the Council ships burned out in the void, Terran fleets drifted silently through the wreckage. They didn't cheer. They didn't broadcast a message of victory. They didn't need to. Their silence was enough. They had not just broken the core armada, they had broken the Council's belief in its own power. On the Capitol, the speaker stood in front of the silent chamber, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not a war anymore," he said. "It's a hunt." And he was right. Humanity didn't fight like the Council. Humanity didn't conquer with speeches. Humanity erased threats like predators erasing prey, with patience, precision, and silence. The hunt was almost finished. The jaws were closing around the Capitol itself, and the galaxy had nowhere left to run. The night over the Council capital was unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against the skin and makes the air feel colder than it should be. The shining towers that once stood as a symbol of absolute power now loomed like gravestones over a dying empire. For centuries, this world had been untouchable, its fleets unbreakable, its rulers arrogant beyond reason. But now, every citizen, every soldier, every trembling councillor could feel it. The hunt had finally reached their doorstep. There were no more fleets to call, no more colonies to rely on, no more reinforcements hiding behind pride. In the blackness beyond the system, Terran dreadnoughts were already there, their massive hulls moving like silent titans through the void, surrounding the world the way a predator circles a cornered animal. In the Council's underground war chamber, the speaker stood over a dying star map, red blinking lights turning black one after another. Entire defense networks had fallen silent. Their sensor arrays showed nothing, no signatures, no heat, no transmissions. But everyone in that room knew they were out there. The Terran fleet didn't need to be seen to be felt. It was in the air, the way the temperature seemed to drop, the way people spoke in whispers even though no enemy had fired a single shot. The admirals, once loud and proud, now stood pale and speechless. Some refused to meet each other's eyes. Others stared at the star map like it might magically change if they wished hard enough. But it didn't. Humanity was here. Above the capital, the orbital defense grid hummed weakly, its shields flickering like a dying flame. Once, it had been the strongest shield in the galaxy, a fortress designed to withstand any invasion. But that meant nothing against a predator that had already dismantled everything protecting it. The Council tried to broadcast a message to their fleets, but no one answered. Because there were no fleets left. The core armada was gone. Their border defenses were gone. The patrol fleets were gone. The only thing left was the capital and the hollow illusion that they were still in control. Then the darkness moved. The Terran fleet revealed itself not with the roar of engines or the bright flash of guns, but with silence. Thousands of black warships slid out of the void like ghosts, surrounding the entire planet in a perfect ring. The light from the nearby star caught on their armor, turning them into an endless shadow. They didn't issue demands. They didn't send threats. They didn't need to. Everyone on the planet, from the highest counselor to the smallest child, looked up at the night sky and saw that there was no escape left. Panic began to spread through the cities like a disease. People flooded the streets, staring at the black ships hovering above them, their engines quiet, their weapons pointed down but not firing. The Council's soldiers rushed to their posts, but their hands were shaking. Even the officers could feel it. The Terrans were not here to negotiate. They were here to end the hunt. Orbital stations tried to lock weapons, but their targeting systems died before they could finish. Communications collapsed under Terran jamming fields. The planet was being suffocated slowly, methodically, with the same patience humanity had shown from the very beginning. In the war chamber, the speaker slammed his claws against the table, his voice breaking into a snarl. "Activate the planetary defenses." But one of his officers turned to him with dead eyes. "They're already inside the system, sir. There is no defense." Another whispered, "They don't want to destroy the planet. They want us to understand." The speaker's breath caught in his throat as he finally understood what the others had already realized. The Terrans could have burned their world long ago. But that wasn't their way. Predators don't rush the kill. They break the prey first. At 3:17 local time, the first orbital defense cannon fired into the void. A single bolt of energy screamed toward the nearest Terran dreadnought. It never hit. The dreadnought shifted slightly, its black hull swallowing the shot like it was nothing. Then, in perfect silence, a single Terran rail slug answered back. It didn't hit the defense cannon. It hit the generator that powered the entire shield network. One shot. One impact. The world's defense grid collapsed like a dying heartbeat. The speaker watched the lights on the map go out, one by one. It felt like the entire galaxy was holding its breath. A voice cracked through the silence of the chamber. One of the junior officers, barely old enough to remember a time before the Council's arrogance. "They could destroy us right now," he whispered. "Why haven't they?" Another answered him quietly. "Because they want us to remember this." Across the planet, Terran dropships descended from the Black Fleet in tight, precise formations. No alarms. No chaos. No shouting. They didn't need to fight their way through anything. Every defense line was already dead. Black-armored Terran soldiers moved through the capital streets like shadows, their boots striking the ground in a steady rhythm that echoed through the city like the ticking of a clock counting down to the end of an era. Council soldiers fired in panic, but their weapons jammed, their lines collapsed, their courage evaporated in the face of an enemy that didn't even need to try. In the Grand Hall, the speaker and the last members of the council gathered in silence. The walls that once shimmered with gold and banners now felt cold and small. Their empire, built on centuries of arrogance, had fallen without a single grand battle to save it. When the Terran soldiers entered, no one screamed. No one begged. The speaker stood, trying to summon the same voice that once commanded entire galaxies. But all that came out was a hoarse whisper, "You can't erase us." The Terran commander stepped forward. His black armor gleamed under the broken lights. His face was calm, not angry, not gloating, just cold and quiet, like the void itself had walked into the room. "We don't need to erase you," he said in a low voice. "You already erased yourselves when you laughed." Outside, the human fleet shifted slightly, surrounding the capital in a perfect eclipse. Across the galaxy, the transmission went out, a single image, the once mighty council capital world under the silent shadow of the Terran fleet. No speeches, no propaganda, just the reality of power reversed. Civilizations that had once worshipped the council's strength now understood who the hunters truly were. The speaker fell to his knees, his voice breaking into a quiet rasp. "What will you do to us?" The Terran commander looked down at him, unmoved. "Nothing more than we promised. You declared war. We ended it. Now you will remember who we are." Then he turned and walked away as Terran soldiers spread through the hall, taking control without a single gunfight. Above the planet, the Black Fleet remained in perfect silence, their ships unmoving, as if they were watching the galaxy itself. The Council's era ended not with a scream, not with a war cry, but with the steady, relentless steps of a hunter who never stops. Humanity didn't conquer. Humanity didn't demand. Humanity hunted. And the hunt was complete. From that night on, the galaxy no longer laughed when humanity spoke. It listened. It remembered the silence.